Morning. So we'll have our program Push Puja. We'll have a seminar on groin hernia today. We'll have three speakers, and Professor Anadya Chandji will moderate this session today, and along with Dr. Shugon Maiti is also with us. So I'll start the proceeding with Dr. Ijlal Ahmed Qadri, who is second year junior resident at Howrah District Hospital. Dr. Qadri will speak on inguinal anatomy, and he'll speak both on open anatomy and anatomy from laparoscopy point of view. So, Dr. Ijlal, you can share your screen and start. We can see your screen, Ijlal.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Myself, Dr. Ijlal Ahmed Qadri, second PGT from District Hospital. I will be presenting surgical anatomy of inguinal fifo. So, my conclusion on the side.
Ijlal, your audio is not clear.
Hello.
Yes. Better.
Good morning. Myself is PGT from Howrah District Hospital.
Just Ijlal,
I
try
will be
to
presenting an
rectify.
inguinal region.
Ijlal, your audio is not clear. Try to see any issue. Audio is breaking.
Am I audible now?
No.
Hello.
It's breaking. You are from mobile, na? Please start.
Hello, sir. Am I audible now?
Yes, better.
Okay, sir. Good morning, everyone. Myself, Dr. Ijlal Ahmed Qadri, second year PGT from Howrah District Hospital. I will be presenting surgical anatomy of inguinal for you. Introduction: the groin or inguinal region is a junctional area on either side of the pubic bone. Surface anatomy: mid-inguinal point. The midpoint, the lining between the anterior superior iliac spine and symphysis. It marks the location of femoral artery. Just yes, sir.
Yes. Carry on, please.
Mid-inguinal point is the line joining between the superior spine and pubic symphysis. It marks the location of femoral artery just below the ligament. Point of inguinal ligament. It is between anterior iliac spine, pubic tubercle over the inguinal ligament. Deep inguinal ring lies 0.5 inches above this point. Superficial inguinal ring, it lies above and medial to the pubic tubercle. Embryology. The fetal testis appears at around 7th week of life. Mesenchymal cells.
Lost connection, Ijlal.
Hello.
He's still there. Ijlal, we lost your connection. You start from the slide, inguinal points. Yeah. Please, we can see the screen.
Fetal testis appears. Fetal testis appears at around 7th week of life, and the mesenchymal cells that is the swelling of the inguinal region. The test descends from the superior lumbar region of the abdominal wall and passes into the scrotum. It is enveloped by the invagination of the peritoneum, which is known as processus finalis. This invagination operates after its arrival of the testis into the scrotum. Which persists and overlays the testis. If this process is great, it can lead to communication hydroxy. And in the adult, coming later to the abdominal wall. Hello.
Yes, Ijal.
Ijlal, you are audible. Can you share your screen again?
Sir.
Share your screen. I can hear you. Can you hear us, Ijal?
I think you lost connection.
But he's there.
Sir, I would like to just
Carry on, Ijal. We can hear you.
layers from when we are into superior aspect, we will have to go through these layers. Skin, then first fascia is also it is a membrane. It is a layer from then scarpa fascia. It is a membranous layer. Then the muscle which consists of external oblique, internal oblique, transverse. Then we have trachea, the investigator of transverse abdominis. After that, pre-pituitary fat and toning.
Professor? Hello? Hello. Yes. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Good morning, respected sir and my dear colleagues. My name is Dr. Nitesh Pradhan, second year DNB PGT, General Surgery, MR Bangalore Hospital. Today's my topic is cause, clinical picture, and investigation of inguinal hernia. Start with etiology of congenital inguinal hernia. All hernias in infant and children are indirect. They occur as a result of failure of obliteration of process vaginalis during the testicular descent in fetal life. Acquired hernia can be direct or indirect. Over age 25, the most common cause of inguinal hernia is attenuation or degeneration and the fatty transformation of aponeurotic tissues of the inguinal floor. This can lead to either direct weakness and bulging of the inguinal floor or indirect hernia through the weak internal ring or the combination of above. Epidemiology, approximately 7% of all surgical outpatient account for 96% of groin hernias, other 4% are femoral. Bilateral in 20% of cases, lifetime risk of inguinal hernia is 10%, male to female ratio is 9:1, it affects 1 to 3% of young children, and definite familial tendency. Now, risk factors for herniation in infants are prematurity in male infants. In male adult, obesity, constipation, chronic cough, heavy lifting, chronic smoking, urinary obstructive symptoms, familial history of hernia, connective tissue disorder, defective collagen synthesis, liver disease. Now, types of inguinal hernia. First, anatomical types. According to its extent, bubonosyl, funicular, and complete. Bubonosyl and funicular are incomplete types. Wherein bubonosyl, the hernial sac is confined within the inguinal canal, and in funicular, it crosses the superficial inguinal ring, and testis and spermatic cord are palpated separately. According to its site of exit, indirect and direct, hernial sac enters through the deep inguinal ring, indirect, and through the Hazelback triangle, indirect. According to its content, enterosyl, amantosyl, and cystosyl. Clinical types, it can be reducible, but the content can be returned into the abdominal cavity. Irreducible, content cannot be returned into the abdominal cavity. Obstructed, where there is irreducibility plus intestinal obstruction, but the blood supply is not impaired. Strangulated, irreducible plus intestinal obstruction and arrest of blood supply. Inflamed, the rare condition occurs when the content, example, appendix and mecal diverticulum is inflamed. Now, natural history and the progression. Initially, the hernia is reducible. Then, as time passes, it can be irreducible, obstruction, incarceration, strangulation, and then gangrene, perforation, local sepsis, systemic inflammatory response syndrome, severe sepsis, modes, and death. Now, rare varieties of hernia, for sliding hernia, where there is a sliding of retroperitoneal tissues, which pushes the inguinal canal. Along with that, cecum and appendix forming the posterior wall of hernial sac in the right side, and in the left side, sigmoid canal. Richer's hernia, where there is a protrusion of one wall of the bowel to the antemesenteric border. Richer's hernia, hernia containing the mucous diverticulum. Medals, it is W type of it contains W type of bowel content, and the inner loop gets strangulated. Clinical presentation: in uncomplicated groin hernia, patient may present with vague discomfort, feeling heaviness in groin, dragging pain, visible swelling. Complicated groin hernia, irreducible swelling, change in color of skin over swelling, aggravation of pain with changes to colicky type, abdominal distension, constipation, vomiting, fever, tachycardia, and other signs of sepsis. Clinical evaluation: history, clinical examination and investigations to confirm diagnosis in obscure cases, to evaluate extent in the certain cases, and to evaluate the fitness for surgery. History should be taken. History includes onset, progression, predisposing factors like raised intra-abdominal pressure, systemic factors, personal history, occupation, smoking, and family history. Clinical examination, inspection, complicated in uncomplicated hernia. The finding on inspections are inguinal scrotal swelling in erect posture. Scrotal rugosity is usually intact. Visible peristalsis in case of enterocoel. Visible impulse of swelling on coughing, straining. Reducibility on lying down and partial or complete, which can be partial or complete. Complicated hernia, change in color over overlying skin. Loss of scrotal rugosity, no visible impulse on coughing, no reducible reduction in size of on lying down. On palpation, in uncomplicated hernia, uncomplicated hernia, soft inconsistency, no tenderness, reducible on manipulation, expansile impulse on coughing and straining, inability to get above the swelling, testis usually palpable separately below the swelling. No, different. How to distinguish inguinal versus femoral hernia? Inguinal ligament is below the inguinal hernia. Inguinal ligament is above the femoral hernia, and Siemens 3-finger test. Direct and indirect by deep ring occlusion test, finger invagination test, and Siemens 3-finger test. Palpation: complicated hernia, irreducible inguinal scrotal swelling, significant extreme tenderness, firm consistency, intendable swelling in incarcerated hernia, absence of expansile impulse on coughing and straining, palpable crepes in case of gangrene perforation, distinct palpation of testis difficult. Percussion, resonant node in case of enterocoel and dull in case of amantocele. On auscultation, bowel sound may be heard in case of enterocoel. Systemic examination, respiratory system to exclude COPD, abdominal to exclude evidence of CLD and ascites, and DRE as to assess the prostatomegaly. Now, differential diagnosis: vaginal hydrocele, varicocele, funiculitis, and cystic hydrocele of the cord, spermatocele, incompletely descended testis in inguinal canal, lipoma of the cord, femoral hernia, hydrocele of the canal of Nuke. Investigation to confirm the diagnosis and exclude the possibility: ultrasound with or without Doppler study, assess vascular relation, contrast peritoneography, which is absolute to evaluate fitness for the surgery. From the surgical point of view, pulmonary function test, USG-KOV plus prostate, plus post-urethral volume, LFT. For anesthesiology point of view, CVC, coagulation profile, KFT, and LFT. Thank you.
We can have discussion for 5 minutes. Rajat, some contribution.
Should we start with the anatomy now? I think he does not have proper correction. So better to leave the anatomical part. What do you think?
Okay. Dr. Ijaz? Dr. Ijaz?
Jalal, are you there?
Okay.
Hello?
Yes,
yes.
sir. I'm here only.
Jalal?
Yeah. Ijaz, you wait. We just share your screen. Dr. Milind will share your
Yes, sir.
screen.
Wait.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Jalal, are you there? No. No.
You
Dr.
can,
Milind.
Isal, you can keep on speaking. Dr. Milind will be sharing your screen.
Yes, sir.
We start from the
So-
point of different inguinal points.
So, regarding inguinal hernia, what are the anatomical factors that prevent
Yes.
Ilan?
Yeah, Isal, you
Sir,
can
I'm
start
sharing
speaking from
my
this point.
screen. Sir, I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, yeah.
Visible,
Okay.
visible.
Yes.
Yeah, it's visible. Can you
So-
tell it?
Muscles,
Can you-
fascia, and ligament of the inguinal region. So shall I start?
Yes, yes, please.
Muscles, fascia, and ligament of the inguinal region. External oblique muscle below the level of anterior superior iliac spine. External oblique is entirely aponeurotic, and on the most inferior aspect of the external oblique muscles, the aponeurosis is thickened and it folded upon its own, and it forms the inguinal ligament. On the medial side of the inguinal ligament, this inguinal ligament fans out and it inserts on the pectineal ligament. This fanning of the inguinal ligament on the medial side is known as lacunar ligament, and this pectineal ligament is also known as Cooper's ligament. It is formed by the aponeurotic fibers from the lacunar ligament, internal oblique aponeurosis, transverse abdominis, and it inserts on the suprapubic rami and ilium bone. Laterally, inguinal ligament is adherent to iliopsoas fascia. Internal oblique muscle. It is predominantly muscular in the inguinal region when compared to external oblique, which is aponeurotic. Aponeurosis of the internal oblique and transverse abdominis joins to form the conjoint tendon. Transverse abdominis, it is the innermost layer of the muscular layer in the inguinal region. In contrast to internal oblique, it becomes aponeurotic medial to inguinal ring, internal ring. Iliopubic tract, it extends from the iliopectineal line onto the superior pubic rami. It forms by the aponeurotic fibers from the transverse abdominis and femoral and the fascia transversalis. It lies deep to the inguinal ligament. It forms the inferior aspect of the deep inguinal ligament. Esselsbeck triangle. It is a weakness in the area medial to deep inguinal ring. The part which is shown in this image, denoted by letter A. This is the weakness in the area medial to deep inguinal ring between transverse abdominis, boundaries of the Hasselbeck's triangle. Superiorly, it is formed by the inferior epigastric artery. Medially, it is formed by the rectus abdominis muscle. Inferiorly, the inguinal ligament forms the inferior boundary of the Hasselbeck's triangle. Vascular supply, inferior epigastric artery. It arises from the external iliac artery, superior to inguinal ligament. It travels medially to form medial to the deep inguinal ring and supplies the rectus abdominis. There are three branches of the femoral artery which supplies the superficial tissue of the inguinal region. The superficial circumflex artery, which lies laterally, superior epigastric artery, and superficial externopudendal artery, which lies medially. Lymphatics of the inguinal region. There are two groups of lymph nodes: superficial inguinal lymph nodes and deep inguinal lymph nodes. Superficial inguinal lymph nodes lies adjacent to the terminal of greater saphenous vein. Deep inguinal lymph nodes lies beneath the fascia lata along the femoral vein. Deep inguinal lymph node also includes the node of Cloquet. Nerve supply of the inguinal region. We have three major nerves which supply the the groin. The first is ilioinguinal nerve. It supplies the upper medial portion of the thigh and the base of genitalia. It enters the anterior abdominal wall 3 centimeter medial and 4 centimeter inferior to anterior superior iliac spine. It penetrates the transverse abdominis and internal oblique, but it remains deep to the external oblique. It travels along the superficial cord. It travels along the spermatic cord and exit through the superficial inguinal ring. The second nerve is iliohypogastric nerve. It lies superior to ilioinguinal nerve. It divides into 2 branches, lateral cutaneous branch and anterior cutaneous branch. Anterior cutaneous branch enters the anterior abdominal wall 1.5 centimeter below anterior superior iliac spine, and then it emerges from the external oblique superior to the superficial inguinal ring. Genitofemoral branch, genitofemoral nerve. The genital branch of the genitofemoral nerve enters the anterior abdominal wall at the inferior aspect of the deep inguinal ring. It supplies the cremaster and the skin of external genitalia. Inguinal canal. It is bounded laterally by deep inguinal ring and medially by superficial inguinal ring. Roof of the inguinal canal is formed by the arches of internal oblique and transverse abdominis. Floor of the inguinal canal is formed by the inguinal ligament laterally, and medially it is contributed from the lacunar ligament. Anterior wall of the inguinal canal is formed by the external oblique aponeurosis. Posterior wall is formed by the conjoint tendon, transversalis fascia, and transversalis fascia. Deep inguinal ring is the defect in transversalis fascia. It lies 0.5 inches above the midpoint between anterior superior iliac spine and pubic tubercle. Superficial inguinal ring is the triangular opening in the external oblique aponeurosis. It has 2 crusts and a base. It lies above and medial to pubic tubercle. Contents of the inguinal canal. It is in male. In male, spermatid cord and ilioinguinal nerve is the content. And by this mnemonics, we can remember the contents of the inguinal canal. There are 3 arteries: cremastric and vas deferens, artery to vas deferens, and testicular artery. There are 3 nerves: genital branch of the genitofemoral nerve, autonomic nerve, and ilioinguinal nerve. Ilioinguinal nerve actually traverses along the. It is not a content of spermatic cord, but it lies lateral to the spermatic cord. There are 3 facial layers: external spermatic fascia. External spermatic fascia is formed by the external oblique muscle, and cremastric fascia and muscle is formed by the internal oblique muscle, and the transversalis fascia forms the internal spermatic fascia. There are other 3 structures which are the content of spermatic cord: campaniform plexus, vas deferens, and testicular lymphatics. Myopectineal orifice of the Fouchards. Myopectineal orifice comprises of 2 regions separated by inguinal ligament. The suprainguinal region, it is a site for direct and indirect hernias, and subinguinal region is a site for femoral hernias. Today, with the laparoscopic hernioplasty, surgeon attempts to repair the weak myopectineal orifice instead of only herniated loci. The boundaries of myopectineal orifice: above is the arching fibers of the internal oblique and transverse abdominis muscle, medially by rectus abdominis, inferiorly by the Cooper's ligament, and laterally by the iliopsoas muscle, and inguinal ligament traverse in between the diagonally through the myopectineal orifice. laparoscopic anatomy of the inguinal of the groin. Median umbilical ligament is the most medial structure. It is a remnant of urachus. Medial umbilical ligament. It is a remnant of obliterated umbilical artery. Lateral umbilical ligament. It is the peritoneum covering the inferior epigastric artery. There are two triangles, triangle of Doom and triangle of Paine. Triangle of Doom, the apex is formed by the deep inguinal ring, and medially, vast difference forms the medial boundary, and lateral boundary is formed by the gonadal vessels. Triangle of Paine, apex is formed by the deep inguinal ring. Medially, subcutaneous medial boundary is formed by the spermatic cord, and lateral boundary is formed by the iliopubial tract. Contents of the triangle of Paine, going from medial to lateral femoral nerve, and lateral femoral cutaneous nerve, then femoral branch of the genitofemoral nerve. Thank you.
I think Rajan, you can discuss these two parts and then we'll discuss the management. Regarding anatomy, you can have some points for discussion. Some discussion on anatomy. Dr. Acharji.
Yes, yes. Just tell us some anatomical factors that prevent the formation of inguinal hernia in adults. Ijaz. Kaderi. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
You got the question, Ijaz?
No, sir.
Oh,
So,
can you
pardon,
tell me about the
could you please
anatomical? Can you tell me about the anatomical factors that prevent formation of an inguinal hernia in adults?
So there are mainly two mechanism: ball and wall mechanism, and the shutter mechanism.
From by? How does this mechanism act? What factors are responsible for this mechanism?
So when the person coughs, there is the contraction of the internal oblique muscle, which leads to the narrowing of the deep inguinal ring.
Yes.
This is the shutter mechanism. And whenever there is a rise of intra-abdominal pressure, the spermatid cord slides, and this forms the ball and wall mechanism.
Okay, can you tell me the difference in the inguinal canal between in an infant and an adult? Ijaz?
Yes, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
I will read about this.
Okay.
See, in children, the inguinal canal is so small that the superficial and deep inguinal orifices, deep inguinal ring and superficial inguinal ring, they almost overlay each other.
Yeah.
And in adults, they are separated by the inguinal canal cells. And another factor while operating, I can ask this question in the management. Okay. Now, tell me about the. You have mentioned about a triangle of Paine and triangle of Doom. Now,
Yes.
Do you know anything about corona motif? Corona motif.
So corona motis is the aberrant artery from the inferior epigastric artery. Sorry, obturator artery.
Yes.
Aberrant artery from the obturator artery. during the fixation of a tracker on the Cooper's ligament, it may injure and lead to. So we have to.
Now, why is it difficult to control that bleeding? Because the artery retracts into the obturator canal, and then it's very difficult to control. You cannot see it retracts.
Okay.
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 Hello?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Professor, sir, I think he has mentioned other things in his.
Yeah. Actually,
presentation.
he has gone through the standard anatomy well, but in laparoscopic anatomy, I would extended little more, some more definitions. As you define the different ligaments, median and lateral, and the hernias from inside is occurring to some foci. The area between the median and the medial umbilical is the supravesical fossa. Lateral to the orbital umbilical artery is the medial inguinal fossa. That is the site for direct hernia. And the area lateral to the intrinsic fold, that is the lateral umbilical fold, is the lateral inguinal fossa, the site for indirect hernia. And another important thing you should mention in laparoscopic anatomy is, as you go deep in the preperitoneal space, you are entering the fossa transversalis. And it is mentioned that there are two layers of fossa transversalis, and that splits and that goes down in the retrograde space. And while doing laparoscopic anatomy operation, it should be in between the two layers, and that is known as space of Burgos. So when you talk of laparoscopic anatomy, you should also touch this point that there is an area called space of Burgos, which is the avascular space. Okay, so that is another important part of laparoscopic anatomy. And you also should have an idea about cave of Regius. When you are dissecting the space for mesh placement, ideally you should go to the left of midline if you are doing the right side. That means you go to the opposite side, and you have to bring the bladder down, and that is the space known as space of Regius. So space of Regius is also important in relation to the inguinal anatomy when you don't go for laparoscopic hernia repair. So that is known as space of Regius. That is the retropubic space. And as Dr. Acharya rightly mentioned, inguinal anatomy is not complete unless you mention this important landmark of corona mortis, and also known as circle of death. Because in this space, if you injure this vessel, it's not only for tacker placement. While dissecting also, we try to dissect the Cooper's ligament. And while doing so, these are very slender vessels. And once it starts bleeding, it is very difficult to control. That is also described as circle of death. So corona mortis is very important landmark for inguinal anatomy when you go for laparoscopic view. Okay. Otherwise, you have mentioned the other points very clearly. You have discussed the contents. Okay. So
it's also good idea to mention two particular areas near the symphysis pubis and near the inferior epigastric artery, where the two layers fuses together tightly, and you have to dissect very carefully over those areas. We can go now over to the clinical presentation.
Yeah.
See, you have mentioned many things, but possibly you have not mentioned in which posture you should examine the patient, in standing or in lying or both, and why. Hello?
Sir.
Examination should be on?
Both, sir.
Both.
Both. Why both? Why?
Sir, in standing position, sir, the hernia is more prominent. Lying down position, and lying down position, there's chances of fallacious finding. And
what are the things if you want to see if you want to know in the history, apart from a swelling in the inguinal region, which becomes prominent on coughing and standing, and at times disappears while the patient is in lying position, what are other things you want to know? In most of the cases, this history is enough to tell you that this patient is having hernia, inguinal hernia. What are other things you want to know in the history? So I can give you a hint. The history should tell you about the positive facts and whether the patient is having any complication or not, and what is the exact type of hernia. So these three, you can think of as a item wise 1, 2, 3, and what special history you should take to know all the things.
Yeah, and another important part is you talked of. Can you go back to your slides? You talked of etiology. In etiology, you mentioned the anatomical defect of weakness of the fascia or some factors. But as you mentioned, the risk factors, some of the risk factors are the etiological factors. Because the one point, any cause of raised intraperineal pressure is one of the etiological factors for hernia formation. It's not only risk factors. This is one of the important etiological factors. Patient having CLD, having tense ascites, patient who are having a situation of chronic constipation or prostatic enlargement, having chronic straining at maturation. These are all etiological factors. They're not only risk factors. And in the natural history of mention, you have just given some arrow that this happens. But is this very relevant in patient, the natural history of hernia? I mean, do you advise routine hernia repair in all patients? If you go to the natural history, this is the history. But how many percentage of this patient goes to obstruction, strangulation, and death? That will determine your approach to this patient of hernia. It's not very high.
Yes, 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Exactly. This is
So this is the natural history. But in the natural history, you should keep in mind that the incidence of this complication is not very high. That's why there is a role for observation. You cannot doing hernia repairing 100% patient. Patient having a hernia, having a wide neck, which is reducible. Patient is elderly, poor risk patient. You may withhold surgery. So it is not mandatory that 100% patient of hernia should undergo surgery. So there is a role for observation because the chance of complications, strangulation, and death is very minimal, maybe 1 to 2%. So that is one situation. And you mentioned about hernia. You have differentiated between the femoral and the inguinal hernia. Very simple test. You see, you cannot make out inguinal ligament on clinical examination. What you make it is pubic tubercle. If the hernia is above and medial to the pubic tubercle, that is inguinal. If it is below and lateral, that is femoral. So it's not only inguinal ligament relation. It's true that the femoral hernia go to the groin and the inguinal hernia come to the inguinal canal and then to the scrotum. But main relation is the pubic tubercle. Clinically, you differentiate with that. Okay.
How do you find out the mid-inguinal point?
Yeah. Mid-inguinal
This
point.
is very important because if you get a hernia in the exam, most of the examiner would know, will ask you how would you find out this point and how will you perform the deep inguinal thing of motion test, deep thing of motion test. So how do you find that area?
So mid-inguinal point is the point between the anterior superior spine and pubic symphysis.
Yes.
So
And he has mentioned another point, midpoint of inguinal ligament. What is that?
So midpoint between the anterior superior iliac spine and pubic tubercle.
Yes. So you should keep in mind these two things. The difference is very little. The difference is about 5 millimeter. If you take this distance, the difference is about 5 millimeter to 1 centimeter. But these are all anatomical books descriptions. So once you try to find the deep inguinal ring, yeah.
How do you find the deep ring?
Deep ring, sir, from mid-inguinal point, it is 1.25 centimeter above.
See, in the exam, most of the students do a mistake. They draw a line from pubis to the anterior superior spine, and from its midpoint, they go half inch above and say that this is the mid-inguinal ring. deepening. That is not actually the deepening. Deepening is actually happening above the inguinal canal in a vertical line to the mid-inguinal line.
Yes.
Point.
Dr. Acharya was not audible. What I am trying to clarify is not by finding the line joining between the anterior spine and symphysis pubis. You measure the distance between the anterior spine and the symphysis pubis, and the midpoint should be in the groin crease. That means you place this midpoint on the groin crease over the inguinal ligament, and from there you go half inch above. It's not that you draw a line and put point above that. You will go almost to the rectus sheath. You should always keep in mind that this line is between the two bony points, and the midpoint you place is the groin crease over the inguinal ligament, and from there you go half inch above. There lies the deepening. It's not that you draw a line between the anterior spine and the symphysis pubis. That is quite high up. You see, is curved. So that is one important you should keep in mind while doing a clinical examination. Okay.
Yes.
And then you come to investigations.
And how do you perform? Before that, how do you perform the deepening occlusion test?
Deepening occlusion test.
Sir, deepening occlusion test, sir. Patient should, lying down position. Hernia should be, sac should be reduced, and then from mid-inguinal point above 1.25 centimeter. With the help with the thumb, we should occlude the deep inguinal ring. Patient is asked to cough. If the expansile impulse, we have to say the expansile impulse medial to the deep inguinal ring. If it is not present, then it is indirect hernia, and if it is present, it is direct hernia.
That's finished. No, ask the patient to stand up.
Yeah. If you're not finding the impulse, you should ask the patient to stand up and then cough, because small direct hernia may be missed. Now, important point regarding investigations. You should always keep in mind that hernia is a clinical diagnosis. So if you have all the features, patient having inguinoscrotal swelling, history of reducibility, and on examination you find a complete hernia and getting reduced, you need no investigation to confirm the diagnosis. You don't say ultrasound of the groin to confirm diagnosis, because you have demonstrated this patient has got a hernia which is getting reduced, coming up on standing, cough impulse pass. In that case, ultrasound is not required. Why do you require the investigation? In obese patient has groin pain, you cannot find the hernia, you cannot appreciate the cough impulse. These are the situations where you can advise for some investigation, and even then ultrasound may not be very sensitive. To confirm is a CT scan. Contrast spectrography is not done, but a CT scan can demonstrate the hernia. So if you have a clear-cut clinical features, you need not say that I will do ultrasound to confirm the hernia, because hernia is a clinical diagnosis. Next is, as you come to the other points, the other investigation will be guided by your history examination. If you have a patient of 30 years having no urinary obstruction, we will not advise for a ESG QEB. Patient 60 plus having some urinary symptom, we ask for ESG QEB. Patient having pulmonary disease, COPD, will ask for a pulmonary function test. So other investigation will be guided by the presentation. Okay. Next was DD. Come to DD. You see, you cannot give a blanket DD in practical examination. For theory, it is fine. If you have demonstrated that this patient has got a complete hernia, it was not possible to get above the swelling, you cannot put a DD of vaginal hydrocele, because it is a total swelling. And this patient, you have demonstrated that patient has got a swelling where it was not possible to get out the swelling. The swelling shows the impulsion cuff. The swelling is getting reduced. In that case, you don't put a DD of vaginal hydrocele. In that case, put some DD where it can present with a inguinoscrotal swelling. Okay, don't put a DD of NC hydrocele with the cord, because that is a different entity. Where you don't have a swelling in the groin, you have no swelling in the scrota. In between, there is a swelling. So your DD will be guided by the patient in front of you, what you are demonstrating. So you cannot put some DD which is not at all fitting with this patient presentation and findings. So this DD is for theoretical answer. But for practical purpose, it should be confined to hydrocele of the canal of neck. You cannot put. Patient is a male patient in front of you. In that case, you have mentioned female, but yes, always keep in mind that DD will be guided by your patient presentation and finding. It's not a theoretical discussion of any swelling in that region. Okay. Suppose very crucial. If you have a swelling which is showing expansion of cup, patient has gargling sound on reduction, don't put a DD of varicocele. Why you should put? Okay, so DD should be guided by your findings. Dr. Acharya, please.
It's the same thing I was going to tell. If clinically it's a reducible swelling and you can appreciate whether it's an enterocele or omentocele,
Yeah.
then possibly you don't have to put any DD at all.
Yes.
It's obvious, but you also should keep in mind when a patient is present with an inguinal hernia, there is often associated hydrocele. Don't miss that thing, and don't forget to examine the opposite side for a occult hernia, so-called. That is not clinically obvious for to the patient, but if you go in and examine carefully, you can find a small hernia there, particularly in direct inguinal hernia in an elderly patient. This is often bilateral, and the patient usually comes with a bigger swelling. He is more concerned about that, but there is a small swelling on the opposite side. So that you have to keep in mind.
Yes.
Okay.
And
We'll pass on to the next
clinically,
last
I
part.
must
Yeah.
just a little
Yeah.
point. Clinically, you must examine apart from the hernia, you must examine the urethra and a clear examination in male patients and
Yeah.
meatus, whether there is a tight meatus or a tight fibrosis or not, and never forget to examine the chest and abdomen. Okay, next.
Yeah. We pass on the last presentation by Dr. Milind. Alokji will discuss on the management of hernia with current recommendations.
Good morning, sir. My name is Dr. Milind Alokji, and I'm second year DNB PGT at MR Bangalore Hospital. And the topic that I'll be covering today is management of inguinal hernia. Now, Bassini in 1890 noted that considering all that is written about the radical treatment of the inguinal hernia up until now, it can be somewhat risky to try to publish more about this subject. And by the 1990s, there were 81 inguinal and 79 femoral operative repair techniques. McVey has quoted that in the entire history of surgery, no subject has been controversial as the repair of the hernia. Now, surgery is the only definitive treatment for inguinal hernia. And before the surgery, we must detect and optimize or correct any predisposing factor. When we talk about the principle of the surgery, there has to be the sac has to be managed and the weakness or the defect has to be managed. The sac can be managed. We can simply reduce back what has come out, or we can dissect out the hernial sac and excise it, which is known as herniatomy. Management of the weakness is by reinforcing the weak tissue which gave way initially, and this hernia repair can be either raphy when it is anatomically or plasty when it is done with the prosthesis. The decision on the extent of the surgery is based on the type of hernia and the desired approach. Now, there are multiple classification systems for inguinal hernias, and I'll mention just the three, the most commonly used three. First is the NIHAS classification. Now, very simply put, if we look at the NIHAS classification, type 1, 2, 3 are primary, and 4 are all recurrent hernias. In type 1, the primary, it can be a primary indirect inguinal hernia, which can be either if the internal ring is normal, then it is type 1. If it's enlarged, it is type 2. And but in both the cases, the posterior wall is intact. But in case of type 3, whether it is A, B, or C, the posterior wall will be defective. Then we have the Gilbert's classification. The original Gilbert's classification only had 5 types, but later on, Rutko and Robbins added a type 6. Which they designated as double inguinal hernia, and type 7, which they designated as femoral hernia. Finally, we have the European Hernia Society classification, where we have primary and recurrent hernias, and then 0, 1, 2, 3, where the defect is measured as 1 finger breadth or less than 1.5 centimeters, 2 finger breadth or less than 3, or more than 2 finger breadths, which is more than 6 cm. Further, lateral, medial, or femoral, and as per if it is a primary lateral hernia with a defect size less than 3, then we can diagnose it as PL2. Now, when we talk about the surgical repair techniques for inguinal hernia, as I mentioned, it can be either anatomical, which is herniorrhaphy, or it can be prosthetic, which is hernioplasty. And the approach, can be either an anterior approach or a posterior approach, which is both in open and laparoscopic. Now, there are many surgeries for surgical repair techniques for inguinal hernia. The conventional anterior non-prosthetic include Marcy, Bessinis, Malony-Dant, Shouldes, Besarda, and the prosthetic is a Lichtenstein tension-free hernioplasty and the plug and patch repair. Then the conventional pre-peritoneal type are the prosthetic repair. The anterior approach is Reed Raines and posterior is Stopa, Nyhus-Condon, and Kugel-Ugare. There is a combined anterior and pre-peritoneal approach, which is prosthetic, and it's the bilayer prosthetic repair. And finally, we have the laparoscopic herniorrhaphy or hernioplasty, which is the transabdominal pre-peritoneal or the TAP repair, and the totally extraperitoneal, which is the TEP repair. Now, when we talk about the open anterior approach, there are few basic steps that, irrespective of whichever conventional anterior surgery we go for, whether non-prosthetic or prosthetic, that are followed. Firstly is the landmark. We identify the anterior superior iliac spine, pubic symphysis, and the pubic tubercle, and give the inguinal incision. And the subcutaneous tissue is also dissected in the same line as the inguinal incision. Then the incision of the external oblique and incision through the superficial ring to the inguinal canal. The cord structures are isolated, lifting the cord structures from the inguinal canal at the pubic tubercle and then dissecting laterally to the deep inguinal ring, completely isolating the cord structures. Then the sac is separated from the cremasteric muscle, and if there is any lipoma of the cord, it is removed. The isolation of the spermatic cord is isolated from the sac, and the cord should be dissected to determine if there is an indirect sac, even if there is an obvious direct inguinal defect. And in case of indirect inguinal hernia, the sac lies anterolateral to the cord, whereas in case of a direct inguinal hernia, the sac lies posterior-medial to the cord structures. Then, if in the case of an indirect hernial sac, it is opened at the fundus and the interior of the sac is inspected to exclude a sliding component, the content of the hernia reduced into the peritoneal cavity. Herniotomy can be done. The hernial sac is twisted and the neck of the sac is transfixed and the distal sac is excised. Now, these are the various anatomical planes that are available to us when we are doing an anterior open dissection, and even for other dissections also. As you can see, conjoint tendon is present. The conjoint tendon is right above the spermatic cord. The iliopubic tract is behind, and the inguinal, the shelving edge of the inguinal ligament is there. Now, first of all, we come to the conventional anterior non-prosthetic repairs. We have the Marcy repair, which can be done in children and adolescents. And here there is high ligation of the hernial sac is done, and the internal inguinal ring is narrowed by sutures to allow a small passage for the spermatic cord. Now, the original Bessini repair, in the original Bessini repair, the posterior wall was opened, and the upper cut end of the fascia transversalis is sutured to the inguinal ligament, medial to lateral, ensuring snug narrowing of the internal inguinal ring. The conjoint tendon is sutured to the inguinal ligament, and the external oblique is reopposed, and this is done by interrupted non-absorbable sutures. But the modified Bessini repair, the first two steps are not done. The internal ring can be narrowed as in Marcy's operation. Conjoint tendon is sutured to the inguinal ligament, and continuous non-absorbable sutures are used. Then we come to the many modifications of the Bessini. One of the most accepted modification is the Shouldes repair. In this case, the transversalis fascia is opened by a central incision from the deep inguinal ring to the pubic tubercle, and then closed by double breasting. And the repair is done in a 4-layered reinforcement. There are 3 things to this. One is that the repair is done in a 4-layered reinforcement. Secondly, while doing the suturing, we move medial to lateral and then lateral to medial. And thirdly, that the same suture is used for subsequent layers. So in the first layer, the edge of the lower lamina of the incise fascia transversalis is attached to the undersurface of the upper lamina away from the edge. As you can see in this in this part C, where the lower edge is the incise is attached to the inner side of the upper edge. Now this is done medial to lateral, and the same suture is used laterally to medially to oppose the edge of the upper lamina of the incised fascia transversalis to the inguinal ligament, as we can see in the in this diagram D. Then the next suture is used where the conjoint tendon is attached to the inguinal ligament, and this is done lateral to medial. And then the mobilized anterior layer of the rectus sheath is attached to the undersurface of the external oblique aponeurosis, which is done. So here we are attaching the conjoint tendon to the inguinal ligament, which is being done lateral to medial, and then the above layer again we are going medial to lateral. Finally, the external oblique aponeurosis is opposed. Now, this is also done using continuous non-absorbable sutures. The Maloney's-Dahn is the precursor of the prosthetic repair, but it is now rarely used. Halsted repair, in case of Halsted repair, the divided ends of the external oblique are sutured behind the spermatic cord and thus bringing the cord in the subcutaneous plane. Now we come to the Disarda repair. The Disarda repair, in case of the Disarda repair, the upper flap of the external oblique aponeurosis is attached to the inguinal ligament behind the spermatic cord. Then the external oblique aponeurosis is incised 1 to 2 centimeters above the inguinal ligament, and this creates a new lower edge of the upper flap and a patch that is made up of the strip of the external oblique. Now the upper edge of this patch is sutured to the internal oblique, and the new lower edge of the upper flap is sutured to the original upper edge of the lower flap in front of the spermatic cord. That is, the external oblique is closed in a similar fashion as is done in the other repairs. Now the advantage here is that there are two layers of the external oblique now, one under the cord and one above the cord, and this results in a physiological closure effect of both these flaps when the external oblique muscle contracts during cuff. And due to this closure effect, the entire canal in the spermatic cord will get compressed, giving protection against recurrence of the hernia again. As you can see, the split is made in the upper leaf, and this upper edge is then attached. This upper edge of the lower of this patch is attached to the internal oblique, and the lower edge of the upper flap will be attached to the external oblique to close the external oblique, as it is done in all the other repairs. The conventional anterior prosthetic repair. Now, this is the Lichtenstein tension-free mesh hernioplasty. This is a prosthetic repair. A polypropylene or a composite mesh is used. The only application of the mesh over the posterior wall is done after making appropriate opening for passage of the spermatic cord, and fixation of the mesh is done to the conjoint tendon and the inguinal ligament by interrupted non-absorbable sutures. Now here, as you can see, the mesh is placed, and this is also how the defect is corrected. The hernial defect is there, and when we correct it, after correcting of the hernial defect, we add the mesh, which acts as an additional protection, and this is a tension-free repair. Another prosthetic repair is a plug in the patch technique. In this case, the patch is placed in a similar fashion to the modern Lichtenstein repair, as it lies along the inguinal canal from the pubic tubercle medially to beyond the cord. And in addition, a mesh plug in the form of an umbrella cone is snugly fit into the internal ring. And this, so as you can see here, inside a plug is put, and above a mesh is placed. Now we have the preperitoneal repair, which is the preperitoneal repair can be done through the anterior approach and the posterior approach. The rationale behind the preperitoneal repair is that the anterior approach simply closes the defect, but it does not handle the contents of that emerge out of the hernial defect. And the preperitoneal repair is done between the defect and the defect and the passageway of the hernial content. So it takes care of both the passage of the hernial content as well as the hernial defect, which the author who speak about the preperitoneal repair say that the defect is in that layer. So the first is a ribs reed repair. As we can see here, that the mesh is placed along the preperitoneal layer, and the posterior wall of the canal is open to gain entry into the preperitoneal space where the mesh is placed. The posterior approach, there is Stopa's approach, which is also known as the giant prosthetic reinforcement of visceral sac, and the Kugel-Ugari approach, where a specially designed prosthesis is inserted through a small incision made above the internal ring. Then we have the Condon-Nijhuis repair. Here, the transverse incision above the inguinal canal lateral to the rectus abdominis muscle is made, preperitoneal space is entered, a hernial sac is identified and reduced or excised by after emptying it. And the posterior aspect of the conjoint tendon is sutured to the iliopubic tract through the preperitoneal space thus developed. Some other procedures are also there, such as the transrectus sheath extraperitoneal procedure, transinguinal preperitoneal procedure, on-step procedure, hernia system. Then there is the combined anterior and preperitoneal prosthetic repair or the bilayer prosthetic repair. Here, it is a dumbbell-shaped prosthesis where one layer is in the preperitoneal space and the other layer in the extraperitoneal space. The disadvantage is that both the anterior and the posterior spaces are violated and repair of a recurrent hernia may be compromised. Finally, we come to laparoscopic repair. Now, laparoscopic repair is technically more demanding, but it has been seen that due to the reduced post-operative pain, patients are able to return back to normal activities faster. Now, the current recommendation is that even for routine unilateral inguinal hernia repair, laparoscopic hernia repair can be used. Otherwise, it is used for recurrent hernias where the preperitoneal space has not been previously dissected, bilateral hernias, along with another laparoscopic procedure, and those patients with having sliding hernia, especially when reduced. Contraindications include previous retropubic space surgeries, intra-abdominal adhesion, scrotal hernias, incarcerated inguinal scrotal hernias, and presence of ascites. Now, there are two approaches, the TAP and the TAP. Now, as you can see in the TAP approach, we are entering entering the abdominal cavity, and from here we approach the hernia. Whereas in the TAP approach, we are in the preperitoneal space. Now, the transabdominal preperitoneal is this. We use the standard technique for creating the pneumoperitoneum. The peritoneal flap is raised over the myopectineal orifice, and the dissection of the preperitoneal space is done. A mesh is placed and fixed with tacks and sutures, and the peritoneal flap is closed over the mesh. Now, as you can see, this is the dissected peritoneum and the preperitoneal space, and this is the refracted peritoneum. It is properly dissected and cleared for the mesh to be placed. Here, the mesh is being inserted, and finally, the mesh is placed, and with the help of tacks, it is put into place, and then this defect is closed again using a suture. Then we have the totally extraperitoneal repair. Here, the camera port is placed in the preperitoneal space, and with the blunt dissection, the space is completely opened. The balloon inflation is done to develop the preperitoneal space till the lower edge of the inguinal ligament, and then the mesh is placed and fixed with the tacks. Now we come to surgery for complicated hernias. Now, the principal area is that there should be gentle dissection. We should reach the hernial sac quickly but safely. Open the hernial sac, taking optimal precaution to control spillage of fluids on the healthy tissue. Because the fluid in this case contains bacteria that have transmigrated from the bowel lumen, endotoxins, activated neutrophil macrophages, and activated complicate cascade moieties. We must assess the contents. If it is an omentocele, we see whether we apply a hot mop and see whether there is a change in color, and we ligate near the neck and excise. If it is an enterocele, we apply a hot mop and wait for a change in color. We try to decompress by enterotomy if necessary, by increasing the FiO2. And if there is no color change, then we can, if there is no change in color back to normal, then we consider dissection. We divide the margins of the constricting ring, keeping important vessels in mind. And in case of a gangrenous enterocele, we must go for resection and anastomosis. Gangrenous omentocele for an excision. The important thing is that we must perform the simplest anatomical repair. We must avoid prosthesis, and we must provide drains. Now, complications of hernia surgery, very briefly. Complications, in case of open repair, the major complications are hemorrhage, testicular atrophy, which is very rare if in case the testicular artery is injured, vas deferens transection, bowel bladder injury. Minor complications include scrotal ecchymosis, wound infection, seroma. Seroma can be in response to the placement of a mesh or in the suture. Urinary retention, nerve transaction, and nerve entrapment, which can lead to chronic groin pain, which is defined as pain pain after persisting after more than 3 months. In case of laparoscopic repair, the major complications are hemorrhage, major vessel injury, bowel or bladder injury. Minor include urinary retention, trocar site hernia, nerve injury, seroma, and prosthetic complications, including contraction, erosion of the prosthesis, infection, rejection, and fracture. Now, before concluding, I would just like to present a slide to show all the various pioneers who have done so much for the hernia surgery, including Vecini, Halsted, Scholdes, Lichtenstein, Nahas, and Conway. Thank you.
Excellent presentation. He has covered almost everything that is there within a very short time. I'll ask you just one question. What is Lytle stitch?
Sir?
What is Lytle stitch or Lytle's operation?
Lytle.
Lytle apostrophe.
Little. Narrowing the deep.
So narrowing the deep.
You say, you mentioned that while doing
Yeah,
the
yeah,
surgery
he
for
mentioned it.
type 2 hernia, you need to just narrow the deep.
Narrow.
That is Lytle.
Using a non-absorbable system. That is Lytle stitch. But he has covered very well, very crisp
Yes.
presentation.
Yes, very good discussion. But point is, you should always keep in mind while facing your patient in an exam situation, you have to pick up a suitable procedure. You cannot keep on saying, I'll do that, because most of the non-proceed repair are not the current recommendation. So if it is thinking of an open repair, one safe answer will be, I'll do Lichtenstein mesh herniaplasty. And if you are in a laparoscopic unit, you are pro-laparoscopic minded, you can say, I'll do a laparoscopic repair. And if your convention is to go by TAPP, you can say TAPP or TEP. That depends. Both are comparable. It's not that one is very superior over the other. So you can say any of these techniques. So basically, Lichtenstein and laparoscopy. And in laparoscopy, pick up one technique what you are seeing. Dr. Maiti, any comment? Dr. Shugwal Maiti?
Yes,
Yeah. Yes.
Professor Saha and Professor Acharya, all the students who presented and also the viewer, I give you a happy Diwali to all of you. And today it was a very illuminating discussion. But, everyone will agree that discussion on hernia cannot be completed in this session of 1 hour. It may be throughout a day. There are so many issues which should be cleared by the discussion. For example, even on the discussion on the midinguinal point and the position of the deep ring, that I think is also not clear even after the discussion and the presentation. And it needs also discussion. And regarding the investigation, I want to point that the clinical diagnosis is most important, no doubt. But the problem arises in case of very small or early hernias when the expansile impulse is not present, and also when the patient says there is a swelling, but at examination the clinician does not find the swelling or no expansile impulse is coming. So in those cases, ultrasonography may be very useful in some of the cases, but even ultrasonography may fail to demonstrate the very small hernias. And as Professor Saha has mentioned, in those cases, the CT scan may be useful. But the best thing I will say that when a patient says like that, I ask him to walk for some time or move on the staircase for some time, so that if the swelling appears, good. But even that does not appear, I ask the patient to come next time, and when he finds a swelling, take the photograph of the swelling and with a mobile, and that is the better investigation than the investigation with ultrasonography. So a mobile photograph is sometimes very important. And what I must point out, and I think Professor Saha will also note, because he is one of the important member of the health scheme and other thing. So in the Sastho Sati card, our health official always wants for the ultrasonography for the proof of the hernia. I think that thing should be discussed, because when a patient opted for the operation in the Sastho Sati scheme, always they have to submit a ultrasonography proof that there is a hernia. I think that thing should also be remembered by the
Dr. Maiti, to add to this, India is famous for corruption. So we have a lot of patients in the periphery who are getting hernia being operated, and probably there is no hernia. So government has come up with a suggestion that for any surgery, patient has to go to a government hospital and then get a diagnosis and then go for operation. So that is another that is a point where you may not need a ultrasonography. So this is just to prevent some scrupulous
If it is asked for,
personnel. It is happening. I can assure you, this is happening. A lot of orthopedic operations are being done because of Shastri Sati where it is not indicated.
but
A
if,
lot of hysterectomy is being done where it is not indicated.
no, I
So
think-
this is a different part. So
No, I think
coming
I-
to this, I agree that, as you said, in pediatric hernias, most of the time the baby comes to you, you find no swelling. The history from the mother is very important.
Yeah.
If mother is very confident that she notices swelling when the child is crying or at home, that gives you a diagnosis. So even in infancy, an ultrasound may not give a diagnosis. Mere history by the mother that this swelling comes up on his strenuous activities, on crying, on coughing, that is the most important part of diagnosis. So in particularly pediatric patient, you may not find a clinically hernia. You have to diagnose based on the history even. Okay, I think we have overshooted time. Dr. Acharya, last comment.
Just a comment about the mace. When there is a recurrent hernia, the placement of mace should be just opposite when it was done for the first time. Like if it was done if the mace in the first operation was placed like Lichtenstein's operation, then you should go posteriorly, preperitoneal mace. And if it was placed in the preperitoneal in the first operation, it should be placed in the Lichtenstein's anterior placement. And secondly, in general, the basic principle of mace placement is that the margin should cover the opening of the hernia and should go beyond it. And that is actually impossible when you place the mace from anterior by the standard Lichtenstein's procedure. Because you fix it with the inguinal ligament, you cannot go beyond inguinal ligament downwards. So preperitoneal mace is in that way should be superior to the anterior Lichtenstein's mace.
Agreed. Actually, Lichtenstein repair does not address the femoral defect.
Exactly.
It is just fixing to the inguinal ligament. So that's why that Lichtenstein does not address the whole macular orifice. The principle of laparoscopy repair is superior because it addresses all the area of the macular orifice. That is important. So you have overshooted time.
one comment.
Yes, Dr. Maiti, please, last comment.
I must make that the present students, the junior surgeon, should be trained much with the Lichtenstein, with the Bessinis repair. Because if Bessinis repair, if it is added with Tanner slide, that is very useful in many of the hernia repair in the young patient, particularly with Gilbert type 1 and type 2 hernias.
I agree, Professor Maiti. I agree.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.